have you guys heard about the bookcase thing? That's now a way to, prove whether you are actually eligible to speak on the topic that you're speaking on. I don't know if you noticed that
if
in
you
the
sit
news.
in front of a bookcase.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that actually politicians have people run to their basements and curate a bookcase that they would stand in front of when talking. So I think we should all my bookcase is in my bedroom, so that really doesn't help. But maybe we should all have a bookcase backdrop. Some of you are communicating. I see Carly's got a little thing right there, and Michael.
I've got a new case back behind me.
No, I only read on my iPad, so I'll just kind of stick my iPad in the background.
I know what happens to us to do audiobooks. Where do I show that? Just put my Audible profile right behind me. How do I brag?
Print out a copy of the book every time, just the cover, and put it on the wall behind you.
I read, I promise.
Some people put their diplomas.
Yeah.
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the At Percussion podcast. This is your episode 232. We are recording on May 3rd, and it'll be released on June 4th. With me today are Carly Vina.
Hello, everybody.
And the lovely Ksenija Kamjunovic.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone.
Casey is out, unfortunately, this week, but we got 3/4 of the crew here. Ksenija, how's your quarantine week a billion going?
Oh God, it is like a billion. I don't know. All days blend, but the number of books I listen to piles up, and that's about it. Nothing else changes.
The three of us had a wonderful Zoom call just a couple of days ago. Our teacher, Matt Strauss, has decided to leave University of Miami, step away. He's just gotten too busy with his family and all. So we had a Zoom call with 40 Frost School of Music percussionists. It was pretty cool. And our dear teacher, Matt, had this great line. He said, "Don't go through it, grow through it." And it's been fun watching everyone grow through it. And Ksenija has posted a couple of lovely videos. There was a Gary Burton thing a couple days ago that I love that tune. And then today she posted some Bach, some G major preludes. So thanks, Ksenija, for the continued inspiration during this difficult time.
Oh, thank you. I attempt to appear versatile. So thank you so much.
Of course. So this would be the point where we ask Casey what happened in history on this date, but Casey's not here. So let's just jump right into it with our guest. Our guest today is Michael LaMattina. He holds the position of the principal percussionist with the Dayton Philharmonic and is also the director of the percussion studies at Miami University. Not University of Miami, very confusing, Miami University in Ohio, where he conducts the Miami University Percussion Ensemble. He also, like I said, plays with the Dayton Philharmonic, performs classical programs, pops, concerts, chamber music, ballet, and opera. Additionally, Michael is the principal percussionist with the Lancaster Festival Orchestra during the summer. So welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
So Michael and I sort of got to know each other through Facebook in a sense, and I think Michael added me. I don't remember which way it went, but the thing that really stuck out to me about Michael is he regularly posts these just wonderful YouTube recordings, and Casey sent along a question today about those, so I wanted to kind of open up with that to get us started. Casey says, "Hi, Michael. Thanks for being on the show today, and I'm sorry I'm not able to join. The orchestral excerpt recordings on your YouTube channel sound great, and it's clear that you've put thought into how you record. Can you share what some considerations for recording equipment and mic placement are, especially for young folks intimidated by recording? Also, I suffer from an acute microphone addiction, and I see you have a mic I've been eyeballing for a long time, the AKG P170, the black small diaphragm condenser. How badly do I need it?"
The video recording setup I've got has gone through a lot of evolution over the past 5 years. I started out pretty modestly, just with an HD camcorder that had a 3.5 millimeter jack. I used a powered mic. Audio-Technica AT822, which is still a really good mic to use. The reason why I used it is because I could just hook it directly up to the camera in the external mic jack. And I wasn't nearly as savvy, with the process of making videos at that point. So as I got a little more sophisticated, then I started to kind of branch out and figure out better configurations for mic setup. And actually, the piece that I was working on that really kind of was the impetus for me getting better with this technological part of putting together a recording was Nigel Westlake's Fabian theory. It was a huge learning process to put that together. It was a lot of fun, but once I committed to it, I started realizing how little I knew and how ill-equipped I was for putting it together, because there's so many ins and outs to putting that piece together. So kind of I learned a lot of the audio part of it through preparing that piece. Things like mic impedance, what types of microphones pick up percussion the best. And then a lot of it was trial and error. As far as the P170, the AKG, I find that to be just a really good workhorse mic. It particularly records snare drum well. And I do many recordings, especially now since we're all at home, in my home studio, and it's pretty dry down here. So with that in mind, a really sensitive mic like that that's sharp and is crisp can also be very unforgiving. So I actually use a mic mechanic, which is something that a lot of people use in small settings, like singers use at clubs, to add reverb, echo, or even delay to their voice. But it works out great, for recording in a small, dry space like my studio at home here. So as I learned my way around the electronics part of, I guess, presenting my music and the pieces I play, I started realizing that, I was never really going to be able to get the type of audio I wanted with kind of prosumer electronics. My brothers and my sister work in Hollywood in the entertainment industry, and they work with, multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment, which we as musicians generally don't have access to. So I thought, the only way I'm going to get my audio to sound really good is, to just record it from a separate source. So I tried a lot of different things, and I found that for me, wave recordings work better than an MP3 because they're not as compressed. You get more detail in the sound. And I prefer just to record my track through just a regular mixer, because it's closer to analog. It's closer to what we hear rather than just going straight to digital, which is, you've probably heard, that brand new vinyl sounds more accurate than a CD because it's closer to how we actually, biologically hear. So that was my approach. And then as I kind of built up my equipment and got more sophisticated with the software I use and the different cameras, I started going to higher fidelity, higher pixels. So I'm recording a lot on 4K now, and having to compress it to MP4 so it doesn't take 6 hours to upload. But I find that all of these things really help in presenting, these super short excerpts. One of the reasons why I decided to start recording the excerpts is because I've spent, 20 years of my life perfecting them, for my job, well, at first for auditions, and now for my job, a piece like Sorcerer's Apprentice, we do that several times a year. It's not just a theoretical audition piece for a playing percussionist who plays an orchestra. So that one in particular was really hard to get right, because when you're on top of the instrument, at 24, you can't hear all the notes. They go by so quickly. So that one, for the totality of it, it's maybe like the two excerpts I did, it was maybe, I think, like a minute and 20 seconds. But the recording time, I probably put about 4 or 5 hours of recording into that.
You don't have to admit that. We'll just believe it was your first take.
But yeah, you go through it, and that's one of the things that, you can't hide when you do these recordings. So I make sure that whatever I put together, I absolutely try to get, I hate to use the word perfect, but I try to make sure that I can play it to where I know I can. And I don't want to put anything out there that, is not on the paper and that is, less than I know I could play it. So, and to me too, putting these together, I think, one of my teachers kind of talked about an audition as being like a mini recital. When you play your preliminary round for an orchestra, you get about 5 or 10 minutes to play, and to start thinking of each piece, even though it might be just a 30-second xylophone excerpt or a 20-second snare drum excerpt, as a recital piece, and shifting, the emotion, the sonic world of each excerpt from one to the other, and creating as much variance within, that round to make it seem like more of a polished presentation of the music. So I really don't like to see excerpts just as licks. That's not really a good way to see them. And I kind of think they're kind of an art unto themselves. And especially when I'm teaching it at the college level, even if I'm teaching, somebody who I know is not going to be taking orchestral audition, the snare drum part to Kiji, the skills and the attention to detail, the minutia you have to address when doing that just ups your level in general. And I think there's a lot of virtuous aspects, a lot of virtue to putting all this work in on these tiny segments of music. So I kind of wanted to distill those and, I don't know, create maybe like a catalog of, kind of like my life's work so far.
Yeah, so I had one thought I wanted to share, then I actually had a question, but or two thoughts, I guess. One is Casey often talks about, and it sounds like hearing you basically the same thing, is that we talk about these skills we build up in recording, and just like our playing, you build one thing on top of the next thing, like over time. And the example I like is like Pixar started with Toy Story because toys are easy to animate because they're just plastic. And then they moved on toward like Monsters, Inc., where they actually had to animate fur. That was their first fur animated film. So yeah, it's interesting to hear like the same thing happen in sound recording. And it's also nice to hear there's, I think, sort of a trope that I think is actually kind of doesn't happen too often. But there's this trope of the person that wins their orchestra job, gets tenure, and then sits in the same job for 20 years and just sort of, well, I'm here. And they don't really continue to grow and progress. And I mean, these recordings that you have are just fantastic, and I know they're not easy. And it's nice to see that you haven't gotten that sort of complacency that we all need to be so cautious about. And like I said, I couldn't even name a single person I would put in that camp. I don't think like Tom for your slacking or anything, but yeah, it's nice. It's nice to see that. But since you mentioned Fabian theory, I had totally forgotten that I sat there and watched your whole recording a while back. And Fabian theory, I think, is an interesting piece to talk about because any piece that uses technology, we have to be, I guess the composer in particular, has to be cautious of the fact that technology gets outdated. And I know the reverb module or whatever it was that the piece was actually written for does not exist anymore. It's been long discontinued. And I'm sure there are many other, maybe even better ways of doing it. But could you tell us about how you conquered the tech of that piece, whether you bought an old unit on eBay or what? And just before, I guess before we mention it, like I should just say, like, if anyone's not familiar with this piece, it's named after some famous, I think, Roman general that was famous for his delay tactics in war. And so the piece heavily relies on a live delay. So you have to have a certain millisecond delay. And when you play, it kind of echoes and you have to play on top of that. And it's marimba and what, 4 toms, 3 toms, like that?
Three toms. Yeah.
And is there a kick drum or I'm making that up?
No, it's just marimba and 3 toms. Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, when I got into that, I looked around on YouTube, and there were 2 or 3 really high quality recordings of it. And one person in particular, I forgot his last name. I know his first name is Matt. Actually, a former student of mine studied at IU with him. He put together a really good presentation of it. So I just kind of looked at the posts he put up and went off of the equipment he used. So I used a Roland looping station for the section that you need the loop for, and then a Digitech digital delay pedal. The interesting thing is I got a couple of them, and they weren't calibrated exactly the same. And then the quality that the delay achieved, the quality of sound actually was different. One had a little more resonance to it. I think maybe somebody had tweaked it, but yeah, I went onto eBay, and bought some pieces. And then I kind of naively, plugged them up to my amplifier thinking, this will be a snap. And then I just realized what I got into, because in order for those components to work, with that type of technology, not like what he wrote it for, you need, first off, a preamp for your microphone, because a microphone is not designed to go into a line-in piece of audio equipment. So you need the preamp. And then when you go from the mic to the preamp, then to the pedal, then you need, your passive box to go to your mixer. And additionally, with the loop station, there's issues of feedback and interference that happen with the cross-sig signals from the microphones. And then finally getting the monitor right, because you can't set up the monitor behind you, otherwise you get horrible feedback loop from what the mics are picking up. So you need to wear headphones. I tried wireless headphones, and of course, using an analog technology, there was a latency. So wireless actually won't work for that piece. You have to go directly into the source. So I was using a mixer like I do for these recordings. So that was a huge challenge, and that took me. I remember I started it in December of, I think it was 2016, because I was preparing it for a faculty recital at Miami, and we were doing Nutcrackers. And during all the rests, I was thinking about what different equipment I was going to try out for it and try to like figure out this riddle of how it works. I actually emailed the composer a couple times too, and he got back to kind of share his thoughts on it. Some people go directly through using a program called Ableton, which I'm not familiar with, but the reason why I went the route I did because it felt like the electronics were more of an integrated part of the actual playing of an instrument rather than being completely removed from how we play our instruments. I felt like the interactive aspect of using, I don't want to call it lower tech equipment, but equipment that wasn't all running through a computer, just kind of lended itself more to live performance, and to the electronics within themselves became an instrument that you had to learn how to play. So in that piece in particular, if you don't really nail the tempos, it doesn't work. And that was the hardest part, getting the tempo changes so that the hocket between delays really work nicely. But when you get it, it's really incredible to play. I mean, playing the whole thing straight through, and when everything's, locked together, it's extremely satisfying to play, and it's really well written too. I mean, the whole vibe of the piece is, I don't want to call it postmodern, but it's certainly, it's not atonal, but it's just his language is really cool. I want to work on the Hinchinbrook riffs next, which is a little longer, and the delay is 1 second rather than. So I think it might be a little bit easier to put together, but still really original, great music to play. I became a really big fan of his music. I had already played some of it when I was at Oberlin as an undergraduate student, and occasionally in an orchestra. Our conductor does program a lot of modern music, so every now and then we'll do a piece by Westlake for full orchestra. So yeah, that process kind of really got me thinking more about audio quality of instruments, and the marimba in particular. It's very difficult to record. The harmonic profile of it has a way of tweaking mics out really easily. I remember back when I was in high school, I did a lot of marimba, and that was something that Lee Stevens mentioned in the preface to one of his CD recordings, that I think it was the young person, or the albums for the young CD he did with like the WC and the Cacciatorina on it, about how marimbas have a way of really being difficult to record, kind of like timpani, because of the sound profile of the the sound waves. So
it's funny you mentioned that, because a long time ago I got a recording of Mexican marimba music, and they actually have guts in the resonators to buzz, but I thought the mics were just terrible and peaking up all the time.
No, I remember ruining a couple sets of speakers when I was in high school because I listened to so much marimba on my sound system in my room at home. So figuring out how to get the least amount of distortion from least amount of distortion from the instrument through the mics was a difficult part of the process. But again, I learned a lot. And you mentioned something about people getting jobs in orchestras. I find that sometimes in the profession, you're kind of frozen in time at the point at which you won your audition, and you see everything through that point of reference, which, I suppose there's nothing wrong with that, but I certainly didn't want to not evolve as a musician. And there's so much more to learn outside of playing orchestral music. Not that it's not great. I really love playing it, but orchestral musicians, I do find, I don't know if it's the mental bashing you go through with the audition process, or kind of the tunnel vision you have to get in order to win an audition. But, my mind is so much more open now, and I'm so much more receptive to different ideas and different types of music than when I was in graduate school taking auditions and starting out, a career.
If you don't mind me asking, how old were you when you won Dayton?
I was 23.
Wow.
So I was just finishing up my last semester in graduate school.
Jeez.
And it actually was the first audition that happened after the 9/11 attacks. If you were probably really, really young at that time, but there was going to be an audition in San Francisco that was scheduled. I think it was for the 13th or something like that, and that was immediately canceled. And then this one was happening in October. So I kind of re-geared. It was a much smaller list, obviously. San Francisco, much bigger orchestra, but yeah, kind of re-geared. And I really didn't know too much about the situation. The orchestra actually has a pretty rich history. It was founded in 1933, and in 2012 we actually merged with the opera and the ballet. So it's a nice blend of different types of music we get to play here. And this part of Ohio, Southwest Ohio, is pretty rich with a lot of really good players, and there's a lot of good music making happening. But yeah, so I kind of jumped right in. I had been playing already professionally in Canton and Erie in the regional orchestras there, as well as with the Columbus Symphony. I had a job as a timpanist and percussionist with the Pro Music and Chamber Orchestra in Columbus. So I got those before I started graduate school. So really, grad school for me was basically going to classes in the morning, rehearsals in the evening, and being gone for weekends, doing performances. So where I went at Cleveland State, they were very lenient for percussionists, very, very nice. They gave us a lot of flexibility so that we could work and take auditions.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Just two follow-ups. Sorry. One is you mentioned like the not using a computer for all the delay stuff, and
Sure.
And I remember hearing Peyton McDonald a long time, probably 15 years ago, something like that, talk about his Super Marimba project, which I bought the CD. I don't know where it is now, but and he said people say why don't you use a computer, and it's like exactly what you said. There's just something about tweaking analog dials and all that's so much more satisfying than just plugging in Pro Tools or Audacity or whatever it is that makes the Ableton. That's what I was looking for. That makes those things work. And also, since we've been talking about Nigel Westlake, I just wanted to mention, I think everyone knows the Nigel Westlake piece, Omphalocentric Lecture. That's the marimba quartet that gets played very often. There's also Fabian Theory. There was a guy in grad school that I went to grad school with named Jonathan Sharp, who now teaches, I think, at Iowa or Iowa State. And I just searched YouTube to see if his Fabian Theory recording was there, and I don't see it, but he has that piece, the Hinchinbrook Riffs,
Yeah, that's cool.
which looks like it was written for guitar and delay,
Yeah.
but he's got a recording of that one up. I'm sure it's great. He's a great player. And then Nigel Westlake is a bass clarinet player, and I know he has a piece for bass clarinet and percussion ensemble that I think never gets played, but it has been recorded. So go check out some Nigel Westlake, everyone. But anyway, Carly, I think you had something.
Yeah, Michael, I think it's so great for you to talk about overcoming some of these challenges in your recordings, because they're really great. And I think recordings like what you have online are becoming more and more relevant as we're all teaching and learning online. So I'm wondering, as a teacher, are there challenges that you've seen your students face and overcome in these very unique times? And maybe what do you think they're learning that they didn't have the opportunity to learn, or wouldn't have had the opportunity to learn or dig into if it were not for this time?
Yeah, unfortunately, we have 4 students that are doing their recitals this semester. 1 graduate student, 3 undergraduate students. So with the graduate student, our department decided that it was best to basically let students, especially for percussion, because sometimes equipment's limited. People have only have access to certain equipment outside of school. So for the graduate student, he actually just did a live stream on Facebook for his graduate recital in the percussion studio. I was allowed to be in there, and I recorded him as well. And he just wanted it to be more of an in-the-moment type of thing. The other students are putting together kind of more recorded style. They're doing each piece at once and then putting it together and to present it more in a kind of a polished, kind of electronic format, which I think is good too, because they'll, while you won't have the satisfaction of playing for a live audience, playing your whole thing, your whole recital straight through, I'm still getting, a really polished recording out of it. I think is, it's utilizing, kind of the situation we're in right now. And yeah, a lot of them, one is in the process of recording the Bach Chaconne, and we've been talking about different ways to use camera angles, different types of recording possibilities. He's also doing a drum set piece. I forgot what it was called. That is, you play it along with an electronic track. I think it's by Evan Trevino. Heatstroke, that's what it is. So yeah, they're getting more savvy. And actually, this is something that I held off on for a while because I was, I didn't want to jump in and start putting stuff out there before I knew it could be a good quality. But yeah, making sure that what you're putting together and posting on social media or posting on YouTube is as polished as possible. You know, any students who ask me, you know, how do you go about doing this? I'm like, don't just put up a video of yourself playing on your phone, you know, or don't just use your phone and put that up. I mean, you might be playing well, but it's, you know, it's just, that's kind of like phoning it in, literally. So you want to make sure that, you know, you might take some patience, but developing, you know, the skill of the kind of the technological part of it, I think is just as important when you're dealing with presenting music in this format as the actual playing. Because if you think about it, you know, somebody turns something on, the audio quality is horrible, they're going to shut it off in like 5 seconds. And that's going to make it just won't make you look good. You know, you want to make sure that, I think from my perspective, especially since we're dealing in music, first and foremost, the audio quality has to be really good. You know, certainly HD is preferred, but even something in, you know, 480p is fine as long as the audio is pristine. And since we're musicians, you know, that's what you listen for first. It actually applies to other presentations, not just music. You know, if the audio quality is bad, people are more likely to just shut it off. So that's kind of my starting point, is to make sure the audio is really as fast and superior quality as possible. And, you know, the students working on these recitals, I've made sure to tell them, you know, don't just tape it on your phone. Try to find some access or make an investment of your own. It's worth it. You'll use it in the future. With some good microphones, good editing software. You know, if you've got a Mac, it comes with iMovie, and there's a lot you can do with iMovie. And then, yeah, just go through, since you have the luxury of doing it, and do as many takes as you need to for it to, you know, not sound too contrived, but to really be, you know, as tight and excellent, you know, as it possibly could be. So I think the 3 students I have that are doing their recitals in this fashion, putting them together as like, you know, a video presentation, it's going to serve them well, especially one in particular who's getting into orchestra auditions. He had to do the process for grad school auditions. He's going to be going to Carnegie Mellon. He got an assistantship there, and he had to you know, he used, I think, a Zoom Q8, which gets good audio and video, and then I think he hooked an external mic up to it as well. So I think it's a really fun aspect too of playing. I enjoy it. I don't find it to be a chore. It just takes time and a lot of planning. You know, it might take like 20 hours of planning to put something together for it to be really good. So I think that answers the question.
Yeah. Well, and then like you said, like if you're preparing an hour-long recital, it can take so many hours of trying to get the perfect take.
Right.
Yeah, of course. That's the challenge. Well,
the thing too about when you're doing a video, it's like, you know, you put decades of your life into playing something really well, you know, for me, it's these excerpts. And if you've put that much time into it, why not go that extra step to make sure it sounds and looks as good as it can too, you know?
Svet just had a student, Kosuke, who did a live stream recital for obvious reasons. And I liked, he put a little note up on Facebook and he said, here's some things I noticed through this experience. 1, live streaming is actually fun. 2, you can study a lot of technologies. 3, you can be exposed to all over the world. And 4, can jump into post-concert drinking without moving instruments back.
You know, when we did it, it was the first time I'd ever done anything like that. And it was odd. It felt odd, but it felt like something like a happening, you know? And every now and then I was recording separately on video so he could put it on his computer, and I would just log into his Facebook page, and it was kind of metaphysical, you know, seeing the room and then seeing live feed on my phone and then videotaping him. It was a lot of different layers happening. It was fun. It was pretty cool.
It is. However, find it to be really, really difficult to go from having people there in the room to assist with recording so that you can actually focus on playing to being the person that has to go around, press all the buttons, and then play. It's so hard to maintain the mental focus to actually take care of the full production and play well. I feel like that, gets the number of hours to 100 easily.
Yeah.
At least for me, I slow down. I was going to ask you a few questions. So, for when you won this job when you were 23, when did you get to Miami University? How old were you?
I started at Miami when I was in 2012. So I'm trying to remember. I was 35. Started. So I taught at a smaller university for 7 years before that. Cedarville University. It's a private university about 40 minutes outside of Dayton. And then, at Miami University, the professor who had been there since before I was born, he was doing a step down. They called it retire, rehire. A lot of universities do that. So I kind of transitioned in and then slowly took over responsibilities. And then once he fully retired, we actually hired another faculty member on percussion, Pat Schlecker, who plays principal timpani in the Cincinnati Symphony. So the profile of the program did shift a little bit during his last, I would say, probably 10 years. Bill Albin, who preceded me there, got very heavily into scholarship and performing of gamelons. We own a Balinese gamelan, which actually we used. We did a concert last April, the second half of the program. We came back and prepared some Balinese gamelan. The first half of the program, I tried to pick up, more Western-style classical percussion music that complemented that. So I did some arrangements of Ryuichi Sakamoto music. We did some stuff from Mother Goose by Ravel, Shigehara arrangement really nice arrangement of two of the movements from that. And then what else did we do? Oh yeah, a piece by Dave Hall called Archipelagos, which is kind of, I had to build this little pipe instrument for it, but it was kind of based more on Javanese gamelan. But it was pretty effective, and students got exposure to the gamelan. So and in the mid 90s, with a lot of the cultural diversification that was happening, Miami kind of latched on to that, and Bill went the route of more world music. So my training obviously is different from that, and we've kind of come to a nice balance. We also have a separate steel band program. So being in Ohio, there's so many great music schools that you kind of have to carve out your niche per se. So right now, I would say students get a nice mixture of exposure to different cultures. The Balinese is certainly an excellent exposure to that, but realizing that, that can really kind of only exist at the academic level here. We're still into, the traditional training, of a lot of music education majors. So more traditional concert training beyond the world percussion that was emphasized for so long. But it's still, there's a great collection of instruments that we have access to, and it's a pretty unique situation.
Cool, very cool.
Just a quick introduction. Welcome, who was not supposed to be here today, but has shown up, graced us with his presence. So welcome, Casey.
Hey, I'm here. I'm gonna do that thing where I show up late to the meeting and then ask all these questions that have already been covered. Is that okay?
Casey, we did cover your question about recording so far, so we got that one.
Oh, good. So do I need that mic? I need it, right?
Yeah.
They're really good. Yeah, the P170.
Dang it.
Pretty much anything on percussion sounds good on it.
People I've asked who know about microphones and things, I tell them what I already have, and they're like, yeah, that's a good mic, but like you already have two sets of things that do exactly what that does. Don't buy it, but I still want to buy it.
Yeah, Michael said he's already ordered on Amazon, shipped it to you, so you'll get a few days.
Thank you.
Well, when we have a less familiar guest on, less familiar to us, we try to sort of ask them what's of interest to you, what would you like to talk about, and Michael had, I think, this just really, really interesting topic he wanted to talk about, and he put it in an email so well to me that I'm tempted to just read the email, but I'll just let Michael talk about this idea of programming, and you have really interesting programming decisions. Before we let you go on that, I just want to mention that you mentioned The Shining, which is a film I for a long time know known I need to see. And so I actually started it like an hour before we recorded this episode and got halfway through and had to stop. So no spoilers, but
Blasphemy! Can't do that.
But anyway, Michael, could you tell us about your thoughts on programming and this Kubrick influence?
Sure. Yeah, one of the things that I enjoy most about teaching in a big university is kind of the artistic freedom it affords me. As an orchestral musician, a lot of times you're at the mercy of the conductor, the composer, other sections, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you're kind of more of the artistic choices aren't always your own. You have to conform to the situation. So the ability to basically, have a blank slate and program whatever I want to for percussion ensemble is really awesome. And one thing that I've always been interested throughout my life, probably because my brothers are so heavily involved in film, is just great filmmakers. And in particular, Kubrick really influenced my whole aesthetic towards art. I find that his sensibilities, his attention to detail, his style, he constantly changes his style. If you look at a movie like Barry Lyndon, he uses a lens that is flatter than a normal lens so that it looks more like a painting from the time period. Attention to detail, such as that. The way he picked music, a lot of the music he picked for his films was already written, and how he kind of used that very appropriately. In The Shining, there's music for strings, percussion, and celeste, which again is used in Being John Malkovich.
Also, The Shining, I turned it on, and it was the exact example of Berlioz that I used in my music appreciation class, Symphony Fantastique.
Yeah,
and then
that's Monte Carlos, I think.
Yeah. And then I know a really famous one is, I'm blanking on the name of the film, Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
He uses the Goldberg variations, like this really peaceful aria during this brutal fight scene.
Yeah. Yeah, he uses William Tell Overture in that one. So yeah, I think he really got what great art was, and how great artists, no matter what form of art you're making, are kind of on the same level. I think he was a lot like Stravinsky. Stravinsky did a lot of the same things where he would bend a genre. Stravinsky's version of serialism was his own. It was a little bit like Schoenberg's, but not quite exactly the same. And you really get the sense when you watch, or when you see or listen, when you listen to a piece by Stravinsky, you're not listening to Stravinsky, you're listening to his treatment of the subject that he's presenting. Unlike Strauss, when you listen to Heldenleben, all you can think about is a picture of Strauss. That was his thing. It was very self-indulgent music. Stravinsky was more about the process and about originality. It really blows me away. So I think Stravinsky and Kubrick actually are very much alike. And because of that, I think there's a certain amount of detachment that is inherent to, when you see a Kubrick film, you don't connect to it the same way as when you see a movie that, is a little more soft around the edges. It tends to be a little colder, which isn't a bad thing. But, when you listen to some Stravinsky, you kind of get the same idea. There's some moments in Symphony of Psalms that are just extremely beautiful, but I find difficulty making a personal connection to, because there really isn't one I can make, because it's just kind of encapsulated. It's like beauty within itself. So I think Kubrick kind of does the same thing. If you watch the first 45 minutes of Full Metal Jacket, that's probably about the most perfect filmmaking there is. You'd certainly get, it's incredible, but there's a barrier that you can't get past, because he's working at such a high level. And I think that's intentional. That's not the type of art that I think is supposed to make such a personal wavelength connection with, as opposed to, another one of my favorite composers is Puccini or Poulenc. I really enjoy listening to Poulenc. He, on the other hand, really manipulates emotions in his music very well, so that they're easily accessible to the listener. And music is subjective. Who's to say, who's better? But I do find that in that upper echelon of great artists, Stravinsky, Bartók, there's a certain amount of detachment that you just can't get past, because it's so next level, if that makes sense. The other filmmakers that kind of influenced me a lot, David Lynch, who's kind of a different shade. He certainly works within his own art. So there's all these great films that had some pretty cool music that went along with it too. And I decided that, you know, in our percussion ensemble programming, one thing I learned when I was at Oberlin, we would do some really giant pieces, lots and lots of gear, very ambitious. And it would take us like 2 hours to get everything set up, and we'd have 45 minutes to rehearse it, and then we'd have to break it all down again. And I just thought, you know, I want to play really good music that I like, but that it's not going to be too difficult for the students to just put together. So some of the music I enjoyed listening to over the years, one that had a particular influence on me was The Umbrellas of Cherbourg by Jacques Demy. He was part of the French New Wave, and Michel Legrand did all the music to it. It's kind of an operetta / movie. And that whole aesthetic, you know, started making me think, well, you know, this music like this could probably work in a percussion ensemble setting. There's just no arrangements of it. So a lot of the times I'll take arrangements, piano reductions, and then voice them for percussion instruments. So it does tend to be a little mallet heavy, a lot of key signatures. You know, you really can't hide behind any complexity sometimes in the music, but I haven't really seen anybody else doing it. So one of the recordings I sent you, the music for 8½, by Fellini, or by Rhoda from the Fellini movie, that took a long time to put together, you know, key signatures with, you know, 7 and 8 flats and sharps, but it really does work nicely. And I don't think there's any less legitimacy to doing percussion ensemble music that's based on arrangements from other great music. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Some other pieces we've done in the past, I want to make sure I don't forget anything. The love theme from Spartacus, which is really beautiful, works really nicely on percussion. We actually did a whole program that was just kind of dedicated to cinematic music, and included the cavatina from the Deer Hunter on that one. That's by Stanley Myers. We just took the guitar piece and voiced it for mallet percussion. One that people aren't as familiar with, the theme from The Conversation by David Shire, was a movie. Like, the movies in the 70s were incredible, and they could never be made today. This had Gene Hackman in it, who's actually still in movies now. But it was a really, really cool early movie by Coppola. And the theme from The Conversation, it's kind of this ragtime sounding piano piece, and it really worked out great. The music from 8½was great. Took a lot of practice to get it together, a lot of key signatures, just a ton of notes. But I think the students realized that, you know, they are doing some different types of stuff, and they appreciate it. We also did You're So Cool from True Romance. And let's see, what did we do most recently? Last spring we did Forbidden Colors, which is from Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. That's Ryuichi Sakamoto. And we also did a piece of his called Rain, which was based on a really short excerpt from a movie, The Last Emperor. I think it was a 1987 movie or something like that.
How about that freaking Liggity from 2001? Does that work on a bunch of xylophones or something?
Atmospheres, that probably would not work.
Come on, it'd be great. A bunch of bell kits.
You can do it. I was gonna ask, or actually add, firstly, when you mentioned at first, when you spoke about Stravinsky and Bartók being the upper echelon level of composers who you don't feel like you can connect to, I wonder if this has anything to do with cultural heritage, because for me, it's inverted. I do believe that they belong in the upper echelon, but for me, I find I have a way more emotional connection to them, and they both come from countries that are closer to mine. So I really wonder if it has something to do with cultural heritage.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't lived anywhere else except for the U.S., so...
Yeah, me neither. I've never been in anyone else's skin but my own, so I can't really compare. But I was going to ask you also, you mentioned that your siblings work in Hollywood, and you're obviously such a cinephile and a connoisseur. How come you ended up in music? What happened, and how come you didn't go into film?
Yeah, my dad's a drummer, so drums were always playing in our house. He started, we all did drum lessons with us. There's 4 of us, 4 siblings. My older brother actually started when he was, I think, 2 or 3. And he was, I don't know, for lack of a better term, he was almost like a prodigy. He was very, very good. One of those people that could just play whatever he wanted to without necessarily having to practice. But really his first love was filmmaking. So we used to actually make movies together as kids, basically like Star Wars movies. one of which involved some hearing damage to my left ear after we blew something up. But
wait, this anecdote has to be told. What blew up?
we were doing we were making like firecrackers that you pull apart, look like X-wing fighters, and I pulled one apart, and it was, I guess, louder than other ones, and it actually gave me a pretty bad shock to my left ear. And years later, I went to an ENT, and I noticed that there was some hearing damage in my left ear, and we were trying to figure out what it was. And I was thinking back to, when I was like 12 years old, we were doing this movie. I'd totally forgotten about it. But it's very slight. It's nothing major. But yeah, we did a lot of explosions in the house. We set off a smoke bomb once in the basement, and it smoked out the whole house. I'm not sure how my mom put up with it.
Must have loved it.
But anyway, he played drums. So we actually played in Spirit of Atlanta Drum Corps together for a summer, and me, my dad, and him would play drum set, trios together. So music was always there. And I got more involved in playing orchestral music when I was in 8th grade. We moved from New York to Atlanta, and the Atlanta Symphony has a really strong youth orchestra. And I got involved with that, and I learned a lot from watching the players in Atlanta play for many years. And that type of music just appealed to me. But a lot of the great orchestral music too was, it was in great movies also. So we would watch these cool films and listen to cool music, and it was a lot of fun actually. So my younger brother got involved in the industry more or less after I went to college in Ohio, left for Oberlin. And he actually works on the Late Late Show now. Right now he's doing all the editing from home. But my older brother's worked. One of his more notable projects is the history of horror that AMC has presented. So so I think we all kind of have our own creative outlets, and I think having that influence in my life certainly influenced how I put these excerpt videos together. So I called my younger brother a bunch of times, kind of picked his brain about what he thought, the best equipment was. And for him, it kind of comes down to the lenses more than the pixels. Really good quality lens. You can almost get a better picture at 720 than you can, with a lesser quality camera at 1080. So that's how it was an interesting household.
And that's how you win an audition when you're 23. You first try to set your house on fire or make something explode. No.
Yeah. Well, when I went away to Oberlin, I was pretty focused just on orchestral playing and doing auditions. And I would always wanted to play in an orchestra, so it's very satisfying. But like we said earlier, you don't want your whole musical life to be kind of frozen in that moment where you get your gig. I want to continue to evolve as a player, and I think having the outlet or a second job of teaching at a university is so invaluable for that, because just even teaching, students at the upper level, knowing that they're not going to become orchestral players makes you a better player yourself. So you have to become more versed, when you're helping somebody prepare for a recital, you get to know a lot more different types of music, and you have to be a lot more malleable and open your ears up, because there's not just one good way to do something, like you might be taught at the conservatory.
Well, I like that you do this. It's a very Michael Bird approach. Like, you play with your students. I like that. I like when
it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, thinking about my schools, not to bad talk any professors, but I never saw Mark Ford play a duo with a grad student. It's so cool to see that.
Yeah, I think too. One thing I've learned, I think, being a teacher and wanting to maintain a certain amount of integrity is, you got to walk the walk. I can't just sit there and tell somebody, that eighth note was out of place. You got to be able to, so when my graduate student last year, David Rim, asked me if I wanted to do Catching Shadows with him, certainly I knew it was going to be a lot of work to put together, but I certainly wanted to do it and, show him that I'm not just, talking. I want to put into action what I'm trying to teach him.
Yeah, of course.
Did you ever get your hands on M80s?
Yeah, we did one, something looking back on it that was really, really dangerous. There was a movie we were doing where a house had to explode. And I built this house out of balsa wood. It was kind of like a ranch style house. And I went to this place called Eddie's Trick Shop and got flash powder and put a fuse in the flash powder bottle and then lit the fuse. And it was extremely loud, made this huge pop. And extremely dangerous. We probably could have really hurt ourselves, but the whole house blew up, and they did get the shot. So.
Oh yeah, none of this would be allowed anymore. This used to just be backyard shenanigans. We would take bottle rockets, like, you know, they come in like a little pack of, I don't know, 6 or 8 or something. You know, take the little plastic container off of them so they're loose. And those of you that don't know, a bottle rocket is like it's a stick, and then there's a little thing, the firecrackers on the front, and you light the firecracker, stick the bottle rocket, the stick, like in a bottle, and then it'll shoot up, and the stick will guide it up into the air, and then it pops, and it's like a little mini, you know, firecracker. And so what we would do is light them all, throw them all up in the air so they'd spin in every which way, and then we'd like duck for cover, and like sometimes they'd shoot down at you, and like you'd like get one in the shoulder, and like bam, and you're like, oh, it was like really funny. One went under my idiot friend's oil gas leaking lawnmower and started the deck on fire. and like I don't know, I mean, we were like 15 or something, and so we 35. Like, you know, we stunk. Yeah,
and we tried to find all sorts of materials that were flammable. So yeah, gasoline worked well, and if you pour gasoline into a styrofoam cup, it creates this really strange goop that will burn for a long time.
I think that's napalm.
Could be.
Yeah.
Please join us next week for episode 233 with Casey and Michael's mothers.
We're going to get a talking to from Ben.
I do think that, not saying people should be out there blowing up things, which, by the way, one of my favorite facts about Keith Moon, drummer for The Who, is that one of his favorite hobbies was blowing up hotel toilets with dynamite. But I will say that, like, with both, they got kicked out of many hotels. With both, I mean, Casey and Michael, hearing you talk about this, I think that one weird takeaway for me is that, like, we think as professional musicians so much about precision and technique, but I think, like, creativity, I mean, stating the obvious, but maybe not, like, creativity is such an underrated part of our upbringing. Like, the kid that had wild thoughts about things is gonna maybe turn out to be a halfway decent musician.
Like put an M80 in a water balloon launcher and launch it over the neighbor's house and just hope it doesn't hurt anybody.
There's a line here of, like, Ksenija, Carly, and me, the people that didn't blow things up, and you two.
No, Carly just went to get her Molotov cocktail, I'm pretty sure, just to demonstrate its line.
I didn't think I had such a different childhood.
I'm just we all blew shit up. I mean, that's like what you... No, yeah, and M80s were so weird because they were like just dangerous. That was the only purpose they served. It's just this, you know, dense little, it just boom, just blows up. It doesn't even look good. It's really loud.
Episode ever.
Oh, this is fun. We're finally talking about something I know about.
Something you care about.
Like something I didn't have to prep for. Yeah, and care about.
Well, you know, the creativity part of it, I find suits percussion really well, because there's all sorts of cool gadgets and things that I love to make myself. You know, clave holders. You know, solutions to problems we have a lot of times as percussionists. If you're mechanically inclined, you know, it's actually a really nice outlet. You know, building your own stuff, building your own mallets. A friend of mine who I work with in the DPO, Jeff Luft, is really taken it to an excellent level. I've gotten some of his pads recently, and the creativity and the craftsmanship that go into what he puts out, you know, is kind of a culmination of not just his musical ability, but, you know, his creative ability.
Michael, that's a really good point, but I liked it better when it didn't relate. I liked it better when we were just talking about firecrackers and being kids. I liked it better like that.
Well, speaking of not relating, here's a terrible segue to Ksenija's topic for the day.
This will sound so lame, but there's actually sort of a section that might cause some, I don't know, giggles at least, I'd hope. Okay, so when we talk about explosions, let's talk about being struck by works of art. Badoom. That was awful. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Stendhal syndrome. And maybe some of you have heard about this. It's also called the Florence syndrome, and it's sort of a psychosomatic condition that involves rapid heartbeat or fainting or even episodes of like confusion or hallucinations. And allegedly it occurs when individuals become exposed to objects of or phenomena of great beauty. Now, this comes from the city of Florence, where it most commonly occurs. Not as commonly as we'd like to think. Apparently, it's more like 10 cases a year that happen, and that's because there's a great density of fantastic art there. However, there are related syndromes, and none of these are medical conditions, right? Even though they sometimes might need some assistance, they are not conditions. So there's the Jerusalem syndrome, which you might have heard about again, and this afflicts people of all religious affiliations, and it's just this sort of overcoming and feeling overwhelmed by being in Jerusalem. And the other one, which I thought was way more interesting, is the Rubens syndrome. But I'll get to that a little bit later, because that doesn't really relate to art and academic settings very much. But basically what the Stendhal syndrome is that when people experience some form of art, they get overcome with, profound emotion. And Stendhal himself wrote, he was a 19th century French author. He said when he went to Basilica of Santa Croce, the Basilica of St. Cross, he saw where Machiavelli and Michelangelo and Galilei were buried. So he got overcome with this emotion, and he said, I was in a sort of ecstasy from the idea of being in Florence, close to the great men whose tombs I had seen, absorbed in the contemplation of sublime beauty. I reached the point where one encounters celestial sensations. Everything spoke so vividly to my soul. If only I could forget. I had palpitations of the heart. I feel like I should be doing this in a bad British accent, even though he was French. What in Berlin they call nerves. Life was drained from me. I walked with the fear of falling. Now, a lot of people report having dizzy spells, and some people have tried to talk about this in sort of like pop culture related, psychology journals. And one of them said, the person who coined the term, her name is Dr. Graziella Magherini. She said that these were sensitive, emotional people who essentially overdosed on art, because Florence has so much famous artwork. But then she said, victims are typically impressionable, single people between 26 and 40 years old who are stressed by travel and maybe struggling with jet lag. So meaning you are sort of like emotionally in a turbulent space. Of the people she studied who were hospitalized, about half had prior treatment for mental illnesses, although prior treatment, quote unquote, could simply mean that they went to therapy for something. So it's a bit vague, yeah? But I think it sparks an interesting conversation, which is, have you ever experienced any work of art or any level of beauty that has made you feel like that is obviously like messed up your breathing or your blood flow, or you blushed or thought you were going to faint? And I was wondering, just to go around this virtual room, do you have any
I really relate to the travel thing, and no, I've certainly gotten emotional in concerts and things, but never felt where, to the degree they describe in these articles. But I did read, as I was just poking around for this, about the thing in traveling, and particularly people who just come off planes. And I definitely, like, pretty consistently on international flights, movies are just whatever. If it's a scary movie, and I don't tend to get scared by movies, I'll get really scared. And likewise, movies that are tear jerkers are just like so affected on a plane. The plane does it to you. And I read somewhere that this is common, and there is something about being away from home and like flying and everything. And yeah, even people who aren't afraid of flying, which I don't think I'm afraid of flying any more than anyone else who just doesn't want to crash. But yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And then when you're in the new place and you're away from home or whatever, yeah, you're just kind of emotionally on edge a little bit. So yeah, that's the closest I've come to that.
Anyone else has anything that they've come on? Well, actually, Ben probably does, I think.
So yeah, well, I was going to say I have two thoughts about this. One, I had a music history teacher when I was in college, and he said that going to an art gallery felt to him like going to a concert and hearing multiple pieces being played at once.
Oh, wow.
And ever since he said that, like whenever I go to an art gallery, I don't feel like paralysis or like panicked, but it's overwhelming for me. I always feel very exhausted. I enjoy going to art galleries, but I can't be there for too long. It's just so much visual information for me to take in that I'm just not accustomed to. And I think that it is a really good analogy, just that feeling of like multiple pieces of music playing at once. Like, and there was one period in my life where I kind of experimented with listening to two things at once, and it's just weird.
Yeah.
But then the other feeling I had was, for me, when a piece of music gets paired to an event, and I'm sure, I feel like Ksenija could probably relate very much to this. And so, for example, I finished learning the Bach Chaconne, which, if you know anything about that piece, it's a very deep piece that's possibly about Bach's wife passing away. I literally finished it the day that I found out, like 5 minutes after I finished learning it, one of my closest friends and colleagues at FAU had cancer. And so for me, I was so happy to finish learning this emotional warhorse of a piece. And then not 5 minutes later, I found out one of my best, closest friends was going to pass away. And so for me, like that piece, every time I hear it, it's an overwhelming sense of emotion. And for good reason, obviously. And I've performed it once or twice, and it's just Carly's played it too. I know it's and Ksenija also for that matter. It's just such an emotionally draining piece, and to have that baggage attached to it, it's just, whew. So that's, I mean, I can't say that I've ever like felt like I was going to faint because of it, but I can. Well, I mean, just art is powerful. I mean, I don't think we need to put a label on that, but yeah, I've felt sort of that sense, I think.
Go ahead.
There are a couple pieces that really affected me, kind of, you know, the associative emotion that went with it when I listened to the piece. They were both, I think, my last year as undergrad at Oberlin. One is the last movement from Shostakovich's 13th Symphony, which a lot of people don't know, but at the time, there was something about that last movement that kind of synced up with a conversation I'd had with some friends. And certainly, yeah, when I was listening to it kind of in my isolation, took on definitely something a little more cerebral than you would normally react to with music. And then at moments of, we all kind of have self-doubt and feel like quitting sometimes, there's a couple pieces that you can lean on. And one in particular was the Poulenc double piano concerto, which, like, again, a lot of people don't know, but it's really extremely great music. And I fell back on it at a couple spots where I really feel like quitting and just walking away. And since then, his music always kind of, rekindles those ideas. And certainly, actually, I used a piece of his at my wedding and had my wife arrange it for a couple of violas. It definitely, I wouldn't associate it with panic or fear or having some type of negative physical side effect, but it definitely, I think, affected me physiologically. It's like the chemicals in your brain. Ultimately, everything starts in the physical. Our emotions come from chemicals in our brains. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I was going to say, I think today, perhaps more people experience this in form of, say, Ben's love for Jacob Collier. That might be, you might be meeting like an author of a work or a body of work that you admire. So it might make you feel nervous and you get those physical reactions where you might feel dizzy and so on. But I thought that was really interesting. And there was this woman, what was her name? Alicia Framis, who in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, she's the author of The Pavilion of Stendhal Syndrome. So she basically created these boxes that you can go into to just chill out in case you get overwhelmed, what you're trying to do is you're trying to limit your sensory input because you're so overwhelmed. But the two things that I thought were also additionally interesting and just funny, one was the Paris syndrome. So there's like the traveler syndrome, but then the Paris syndrome is not a syndrome that you'd think, you're so overwhelmed with the beauty of Paris. You're actually so disappointed with the fact that Paris is not what it's depicted in artwork. So you get an emotional negative. Yeah, just like really dirty, and the waiters are really mean. Well, that wasn't my experience.
Everyone hates us. Yeah.
Everyone hates us. The French really hate anyone who speaks English. Not true. Okay. But again, sort of. Mostly true. I didn't say that. But just as an effect of overly romanticizing an idea before, going to it, you get disappointed. But the best revelation of all, if I may, was Rubens syndrome. Listen to this. There was a report that 20% of people had engaged in an erotic adventure inside an art museum, and the findings were taken from a national Italian survey of 2,000 people. Other places where the respondents said they had erotic adventures were like beaches, trains, and nightclubs. The report's authors christened this state of emotional sexual arousal as Rubens syndrome, named after the Flemish old master who painted many sensuous nudes throughout his career. It would appear that the main difference between Stendhal syndrome and Rubens syndrome is that Stendhal syndrome provokes negative emotional reactions for some reason, because you lose control over your body in a way that, doesn't result in a favorable interaction with another human being. But the other one has a positive sort of reaction. That's what they said.
You're really academic. This is great. What'd you say? A positive contraction with somebody? Is that what you said? That's really astute.
I'm sorry. But wait, there's one daily Italian newspaper, Il Gazzettino, reported. Who would have ever said that the corridors of the Accademia Museum in Florence were more erotically charged than the atmosphere in a discotheque? That Botticelli's Primavera instigated hardcore thoughts and actions, and that the rooms of Guggenheim Museum in Venice are more stimulating than Viagra. That's what serious
That's
news
the technical conclusion of the study.
But what they said, a person mentioned his name. Well, it doesn't matter, whatever he said. He said, people have come to the museum like you for some kind of sensual stimulation. And above and beyond these specifics is the general awareness that museums are places set apart from the normal world, where we go specifically for purposes of aesthetic contemplation, where therefore the usual social rules don't quite apply, because you are frequently looking at nudes and war or whatever that you don't get to see, in the street. This awareness in itself probably fosters erotic fantasy and contact. To oversimplify a bit, we go to museums to look and to fantasize. It's not surprising that some of that should carry over from the pictures on the walls to the people standing in front of them. So it's really dangerous to go to a museum, and it's really good that nobody's letting us in right now. That's the takeaway.
Or maybe if you're trying to get lucky, you should go to a museum and just hang around.
But
Mike, you picked a weird episode.
This is, honest to God, this is the best episode of the podcast.
There's a Seinfeld kind of tackles that issue. I don't know if you're. It's with the cured meats. George has a love for cured meats, and it creates arousal in him. It's actually really funny. George Costanza.
Oh, okay. I thought so. Yeah. Seinfeld episode. Yeah.
It's making me think that Michael Scott quote, like he's talking about Joe Camel, and he says, "I can't even look at a pack of cigarettes without thinking of a penis now."
That's The Office, right?
Yeah.
Ksenija, is there any is this related to? Because it reminds me of how people react in church. They pass out, they shake, they speak in tongues, or even stigmata, people who get stigmatic and get the the wounds of Christ on their body and things. It seems like it's similar. I couldn't find anything reporting on much of that other than Jerusalem syndrome.
No, I couldn't find anything similar. I was sort of trying to link this to, as we spoke previously, briefly, about getting goosebumps, just having a physical reaction to something that's emotionally really impactful. And what I've found was that, those who reported, getting chills from, say, listening to music and not simply from being too cold, when they did brain scans on them, they found a denser volume of brain fibers that connect the sections that process auditory information and emotions. More fibers means that you have a more efficient processing between the two sections. So basically, he concluded that those with stronger connections may feel more intense emotions generally. So people who are more easily brought to tears with art are probably people who are more easily brought to tears in general in life. And therefore, then their body,
Right.
because they get this surge of adrenaline, which then causes a surge of dopamine and all of these other hormones, their body starts reacting by, goosebumps, sweating, heart
Right.
palpitations,
And because they've felt these emotions, their body is so familiar with those states, the neural pathways that bring them there are quicker and supercharged with myelin and all that, and thus they like get to that state easier, just like musicians who are good at getting emotional when they play. If you could do it once and then twice and then three times, well, the fourth time it's a state that you're able to kind of bring yourself to. It's sort of related, right?
You mentioned something about it being prevalent in 26-year-olds or people in their 20s.
Yeah, it says 26 to 40-year-old, primarily single.
Yeah, well, the single point is kind of interesting because I noticed after I was married and having a family now that there's a certain emotional reservoir that I've got, and I definitely feel emotionally different. When I was younger, the emotion I felt when I played was very different from the emotion I feel now. And I think a lot of it has to do with, the emotional interaction I have with my family and my wife and my son. There's a certain reservoir I think of, if I wanted to tap into something sad or dark when I was younger and single, it was a lot easier than it is.
Wow.
So it's just kind of my perspective on it.
That's really interesting.
It
So
probably means I'm happier now. But, I do think you can quantify emotion. When you're doing an audition, you basically have to be an actor and you have to summon emotions you don't feel to bring that across. So
that's really interesting. Anybody else, have you noticed that post marriage babies?
I can't speak to babies, but I guess what I thought was so interesting about this in relation to what we do is, I guess the syndrome is happening because people are just so fully engaged and connected to the art that they were seeing. So I guess that's what we're all, not that we want to make people sick in the concert halls or, like have an ambulance on standby every time we perform, but like that's what we're all striving for is this connection, right? We want to communicate something, and whether it's like super powerful joy or, something less positive, like grief, like Ben, you're talking about the chaconne. I guess that's what it's all about. I don't know. And to speak to whether you're single or married, I mean, for me, like my relationship to playing and my emotional, self when I'm performing is always changing, as I'm sure, like for everybody. And sometimes we're in darker places or happier places. But I don't know if anyone else has something to say about that.
Did you guys ever hear that story? I think it was the premiere Steve Reich concert. I want to say it was Carnegie Hall. And I believe the story goes they're playing 4 organs.
Yeah.
And I mean, which is probably one of the most like jarring, one of the more challenging Steve Reich pieces as far as like prolonged jarring, textures can go. But supposedly this lady walks up to the front of the stage, puts her hands on the front of the stage, stares at Steve Reich, and then I guess when she gets his attention, he sees her, she just starts slamming her head into the stage.
I heard it was like a flip-flop.
I heard it was
head flip-flop.
Yeah,
that's the Miami version.
That's a minor detail. M80 bottle rocket. There's hardly any difference. No, I don't know. It's just a story I heard a long time ago when I was younger. But it does sound like one of those like tales that, it might have been like her shoe. Hopefully it was her shoe. I hope you're right. But yeah, profound effect. I mean, you'd think you just leave. I've walked out of movies because they suck so bad. Just like, I just can't. I don't care how this ends. What was that movie?
What movie?
What was that? Yeah, okay. My mom and I walked out of, what was that Bill Murray movie where he like goes to Japan and like
Lost in Translation.
Oh God,
Don't
it's like,
offend Michael.
oh God, I walked out. It's just like, there's no way this could end that I could, like, it doesn't matter. Like,
See, that's one that's been on my list that sounds interesting. So thanks for ruining it, Casey.
No, that's
I think
good.
it's,
It was good.
yeah, is it good, Michael?
I like that.
I didn't
It's
I didn't
great.
get it. It
His
was
brother
so.
actually directed it, but no big deal.
Who directed? Who?
I said his brother actually directed it, but no big deal.
No, you're kidding, right? I came in late, so anyway. Well, then I think you have a question, right?
Yeah, so totally shifting gears. I saw in Michael's bio that he went to Oberlin Conservatory, and we had Michael Rosen, who's taught at Oberlin, I think, for the past 172 years. We had him on as a podcast guest a while back, and he was. I mean, the guy is no spring chicken, but he still to this day has so much energy. And like the 3 or 4 of us that were on that episode, like we literally could not keep up with his responses. I mean, he's so knowledgeable and just such an incredible person. I think he's maybe a PAS lifetime educator, but not Hall of Fame, or he was very recent. No, he's just inducted Hall of Fame, I think maybe 2 years ago. But I mean,
yeah, it's in November.
Yeah. But I mean, just a fascinating person, and I just want to like tell us about it. What was it like?
Yeah, I went to Oberlin from 1995 through 99, and the makeup of our studio was there was a mixture of orchestral players and players pursuing more modern contemporary music. So there was actually a good blend, and a lot of us are still playing. One plays in the Minnesota Orchestra now, another plays in the Kennedy Center Orchestra. So he's actually really versatile. He's just as at home teaching time for marimba as he is doing Scheherazade and snare drum. And he started that job after he was principal percussionist, I think, for 5 or 6 years in Milwaukee. So he had that much going in. Duff taught there prior, so he did some studying with Duff. So he kind of keeps, Cleveland orchestras so dominant in Northeast Ohio that he kind of is able to balance that that influence in the area and the respect that people have for, orchestral playing, along with all of the innovations he's made in modern playing on the marimba, introducing all that Japanese music back in the 70s. And he's very well versed, but I think most importantly is he really likes to teach. He really enjoys teaching, and being a good player and a good teacher aren't necessarily always that isn't always the case. But yeah, he's both. But the sense I got was he really enjoyed the process of teaching and taking music apart. He was definitely he teaches his students to be musicians and not just technicians. So at that time, I was in a very different kind of headspace for playing, and I was really more just about technique. And I think a little at a time, he was kind of trying to penetrate my thought process a little more and thinking more in terms of musicality and phrasing, and not to be so technique centric. I was extremely influenced when I was in high school by Lee Stevens, and I probably had the whole first 45 pages of Method and Movement memorized. So it was very dry and very technical, and that's where I started. That was kind of my point of that's where I started my point of view from playing. And I would say I'm probably still more technically oriented, but looking back on it, the training I got from it, even though I didn't realize it at the time, made me more of a complete musician than just an excerpt jock. But yeah, he programmed some really cool stuff too. Like I was saying, percussion ensemble. I remember, he programmed Ostinato Pianissimo once by Cowell, and earlier we had done another piece of his called.
Did you play the xylophone part?
I played the porcelain bowl part.
Okay. Which
is really tricky too. It's eight separate pitches. It's really hard to read.
It's hard.
But we also did these pieces. A Hocket that somebody wrote for Henry Cowell was for 4 bass drums, I think it was. I forget. He programs really cool stuff, and we, I just learned a lot. And he was more than anything, really into teaching, and that makes a big difference. I felt like, he just wasn't. It's just not just a job for him. He's really invested in his students, and he's kept up with me over the years. I graduated from there in '99, and he'll still drop an email every now and then, and we stay in touch. So yeah, he was great. I enjoyed studying with him.
Yeah, very cool. I mean, when we talk about famous teachers, obviously, like Robert Van Cise has many successful students. Last week, I'm sure you guys talked about Alan Abel and all of his students. And Michael Rosen is probably the other one I can think of that just has just a legendary list of outstanding students, and Tom Freer for that matter also. But yeah, what you studied with Freer also, right?
Yeah, I did my graduate work. Yeah, it's very totally different.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I think I didn't realize that what I got from Rosen at the time was, it turned out to be a lot more valuable than I realized it was at the time.
Very cool. Yeah, and I'm sure after 4 years of studying with him, you felt like you still hadn't gotten everything you could. I'm sure there was still stuff left in there.
Well, I think, especially
that his one podcast episode turned into 2 or 3.
Yeah, teaching at a university really, I've modeled a lot of my teaching after the way he taught me, especially in dealing with kind of the mental part of it. I make sure that I don't want a student to leave a lesson feeling bad. I want them to feel good about themselves, feel good about their playing, even if it might not have been their best day. So, because music is not about doing one thing the way you tell a student to play it. That's doesn't really have much to do with playing at all. Great. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Michael. Yeah, thanks for having me. And we will see everyone else on the next episode for episode 233.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.